Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first panel of this morning. First of all, I wanted to thank the competition authority, the Portuguese competition authority, and congratulate you for your 20 years and for putting together such an amazing program with fantastic speakers. And thank you for inviting me to chair this first panel on artificial intelligence and competition. I want to thank you also for publishing the paper that you, President, you mentioned in your speech. I would recommend everyone in the room to read this paper because it is extremely well written. It sets the scenes amazingly for our panel, and it's really a very good read, and it also has a lot of interesting statistics, so highly recommended. I'm Penelope Papandropoulos. Since April, I've been the head of the Chief Technology Office at DG Comp. Before that, I worked for 4 years with Executive Vice President Vestager on digital files. And before that, I worked as the chief economist and in private practice. I have around me a great group of speakers. I will introduce them in a moment as they speak. But as it turned out, and listening to President van der Waal this morning, I realized that we're an economist-only panel. I guess this was on purpose, but I was not told of that. And it also made me realize that 2003 and 20 years ago was also the year that the chief economist team was created at DG Comp. Not maybe as important as Regulation 1, but for us economists it was definitely a very big moment, and one of those moments in the pendulum that was mentioned also in the talk this morning. So fast forward 20 years, I am sure you all feel like me that we live in a completely different world from 20 years ago, a world of transition and a world where the technological pace is absolutely relentless. Competition agencies are racing to catch up with new instruments. Some of us have new tools to deal with the market power that has been accumulated by digital platforms, and also setting up technology offices like the one where I work, essentially to bring in new skills into the agency to understand the technological developments, but also to be able to have expertise and tools to also make the most of the technology. So it's not just a story of doom and concerns. There's also opportunities. So the topic of our panel today, AI, has been on everyone's mind, specifically for the last few months after ChatGPT was released. And essentially, we were all confronted with what machine learning and generative AI actually was. What we saw, I would say, was part impressive. We were like, wow, this is a machine that can actually make very nice texts. It was in part scary when you see the deep fakes and you can make anyone say anything. So there are some scary parts and also some disappointing parts. I mean, if you've used ChatGPT, it also talks rubbish and has hallucinations, as one says, and says things that are completely wrong and don't exist. So in the last few days, there's also been an acceleration of events. We've had the G7 statements on the Hiroshima process, the US executive order that I think Christina will say a few words about, the Safety Summit, AI Safety Summit in the UK, of course, and in the EU. Olivier Gerson mentioned it earlier. We also have the negotiations that are hopefully in the final stretch between the Council and the Parliament for the adoption of the AI Act, which would be the first binding regulation dealing with some of the risks of AI. So the political attention, for sure, is at a climax when it comes to AI. An interesting fact is that we also have a lot of the big players that are asking the regulators to pay attention and to be, as Elon Musk said last week in the summit, he said we need a referee. So this is a very interesting moment. And at least we are being asked to pay attention to some risks. And the range of concerns is very wide. I've already alluded to some of them. There's the impact on jobs, the impact on disinformation, impact on data protection, copyright. I mean, it's extremely broad. What will occupy us today, of course, is also a very, very important topic, which is the fact that you have very few players at the moment. And I think that that's part of the debate. Where will this be going? We will have only a few, and will it be the same? Or we will have a few, but different ones? Or is AI actually bringing a lot of opportunities? I think the debate is still out there as to where we are going, but there are concerns. And so what I would hope that we achieve today with this panel is to unpack a little bit the hype, the excitement, and focus on the real concerns for us as competition authorities and what we can do. Olivier Gerson also mentioned, it's true, we have some tools, we have antitrust, we have the DMA, we have merger control, but we first need to understand what the real concerns are. And before I give the floor to the panelists, of course, a lot of concerns, a lot of anxiety, but also what I would want to talk about in the panel as well is not just risks and challenges, but also the opportunities that AI can bring to us as competition agencies, because I think that we can also take something good out of it. So what I've done is that I've asked the panelists to in turn give their thoughts on three themes. The first one is AI and the risk of further entrenchment of the big tech platform, or the risk of grandfathering of market power. So what do we think and what do we know about that risk? The second theme will be about collusion and new forms of collusion. So will these new tools make it harder for us to detect collusion? Will there be new forms? Do we have the right legal tools to deal with these new forms of collusion? There are a number of cases that Professor Gini will talk about. In Spain, there was a PropTech case. Also in the US, you have a big case with a rent-setting algorithm, RealPage. So that will be the second theme, the collusion part. And the third theme will be more about the opportunities and what AI can bring to agencies. What are the new tools and the new opportunities essentially to help us be better at our job, better at detecting, better at analyzing the information that we have. So first, I will give the floor to Christina. Actually, none of the speakers here really need an introduction, but I'll still say a few words about each of them before they speak. So I will start first with Christina, who has a long career in the private sector as an antitrust economic expert. For 20 years, she was leading CRA Europe and then Keystone. She's appeared in numerous antitrust and merger cases. A very recent one where she was a lead economist is the Microsoft Activision, which has been a real saga for all of us. And you've also been, Christina, quite active, commentator on digital regulation, digital cases, on social media, and also in many conferences. I've heard you say that you thought we were naive to think that AI would be, opening new opportunities, and that we will probably we're most likely to see, again, a few big giant fighting. So I give you the floor, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on the three themes of the panel.
Thank you so much, Penelope, and thank you, of course, to begin with, to the Portuguese Competition Authority, Nuno, Ana Sofia, many others. It's a special pleasure always to be back in Lisbon. I've been in Lisbon multiple times over the last 20 years, sometimes working with the Competition Authority, which I think is recognized generally as one of the most thoughtful and effective agencies around. So it's a particular pleasure to be here. So it's a pleasure to be here on this stage with you. Not many people know, no one knows. Penelope and I share a birthday, although she's much younger than me, but there you go. We go back a very long way. And then
Even younger.
Even younger. And Mike and I go back a long way, and of course it's good to be here with friends. Let me also start with what I think is, or should be, a religious practice when you come from the private sector, which is disclosure. Of course, people who come from agencies are known for their provenance. People who come from the private sector should be saying a couple of words. I'm not involved in any particular matter involving AI. I'm not advising anyone on this particular topic, but in digital generally, I've been working adverse to Google, Facebook. I've been working for Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, News Corp, Uber, and others. So let's finally get into the substance. What I intend to do is set the scene a little bit for the discussion that will follow. Indeed, the title of this panel is Race to AI, and there is no question that the landscape is moving incredibly fast, not just the business tech landscape, goes without saying, but also the policy landscape, as Penelope says, is catching up. There's a lot of noise, a lot of agitation in this space, an anxiety that we shouldn't let this latest hydra get out of control, run away with us like we've done, essentially with other technology, digital technologies beforehand. So to just set the scene again, I'd like to cast our mind back, and not very far. We've gone back 20 years this morning with a very interesting discussion that preceded us. But I think in AI, you go back 6 months, and it's already the prehistory. So think about last summer. Last summer was peak panic moment for AI because you had all this robot extinction narrative going around. There was Jeff Hinton at Google, who had been one of the fathers of AI, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, going around and talking about the robot extinction risk. There was a 22-word declaration, almost a tweet by AI founders, grandfathers and fathers, essentially saying that the priority was mitigating the risk of existential threat from AI, with the world at the same time scratching its head and saying, wait a minute, you kind of made this stuff and now you're telling us we should be scared? So exactly what are you saying? And the underlying sense of a disembodied threat is very much still in the discussion from the companies themselves. If you look at the blog for OpenAI, there's still something this week that says super intelligent, may be feeling far away, but it's actually arriving fast. And you think, arriving? I mean, you're building it. You're selling it. It's not a UFO that's going to land and it's going to arrive in some way. So there's all of this kind of curious discourse. And of course, as Penelope said, there was an invitation on the part of the companies themselves. Please, regulators, please do something to help us. But not too much. Because again, Sam Altman in his whistle-stop tour of capital was begging for regulation and at the same time saying, well, you know, if you do something we don't like, we're out of town here. So a huge hype cycle, which has been peaking over the summer, when the people who actually know, the AI ethicists, were saying, just wait. I mean, we're not talking about an extinction risk, we're talking about potentially catastrophic risk, but in a different dimension. Penelope alluded to it, but if you talk to serious people, of course, the nub of the issue, the real concern, is about the replacement of labor. This is something that Daron Acemoglu, a very famous economist, has made clear at a presentation in the Senate just last week. The issue is that this stuff may not be pro-worker and a complement to work, but it can be a replacement to work. It can be essentially limited wage growth, raise inequality. In addition to that, of course, there's the exacerbation of discrimination and inequality. Already today, we are using some of these tools as a replacement for professional judgment of, for example, nurses, doctors, with enormous implications for the outcome, with racial, ethnic bias that can be very seriously exacerbated. There's online disinformation which pursues us all, which can be exacerbated. There is amplification of toxic content, again, which is a serious possibility. There is fake identity, deepfakes, impersonation, which is an issue. And then major injury to privacy. This data belongs to us and is being used to train this model, and what is the correction that I have in my hands, copyright problems. And also something which, in this day and age, is absolutely staring us in the face. To what extent this can amplify the massive crisis in human rights online that we are facing, because effectively it increases the scope and the speed at which you can effectively implement digital repression in some regimes. So all of this is the real, and you can call it a catastrophic potential risk, not the existential one. So that's something that really needs to be regulated. Now, in thinking about what we do and how we regulate, we also, of course, need, why I've started with the hype, to distinguish hype from reality. And I like to quote here, there's an enormous amount of hype around here, no kidding, but one of the most serious people I really think should be listened to in talking about this is Meredith Whittaker, who is the president of Signal, the encrypted messaging app. It's a non-profit, so really she doesn't have a profit motive in what she says. And she has been very vocal in trying to just strip out the layers of hype and confront us with what's really behind it. The reality is that AI is a marketing term for a compute-intensive system which existed for some time, but actually at the present level of sophistication, only certain large companies can produce. It's not intelligent. It's not a sci-fi threat, as we said. This framework existed since at least 2017. But the hype cycle really started in January this year when the latest version of ChatGPT was put online, giving real people, citizens, the opportunity to have, for the first time, the experience of a robot who can create images, mostly actually ripped off from existing artists without any remuneration, to create text, which Penelope says is mostly wrong, hallucinating, not tested, not citation, but seemingly impressive because, of course, it's an interface that gives people this simulated experience. Oh my God, I'm talking to a robot, kind of a human. He's spitting out nonsense, but ultimately it's there. So this is really a marketing term, and putting ChatGPT online in the way it was a huge advertisement, okay, for ChatGPT and Microsoft, inevitably, for the technology, because it is on the back of this enormous advert that GPT as an API is being sold to the Microsoft enterprise customers who are on cloud. And so at the same time, this great narrative is being created about this is something which will transform every single form of human activity and every single form of industry, and it's kind of sort of like, yeah, but at the moment it does kind of pictures and it does text. Exactly what is it going to do and how is it going to transform other than the risk that I just said? And of course, it is useful advertising for Microsoft and the other big companies, we'll get to that now, because it does allow them to sell this technology to their customers, their cloud customers, at really healthy prices, making a lot of money. Which is really the objective of the exercise. So really, we need to be clear that we are responding to an ad in the main, a very expensive one, and that's exactly the type of hype cycle that VCs in Silicon Valley need, because you don't make money from the technology, you make money for as long as people believe that there is a potential IPO or a sale to be made at hugely inflated prices. Does anyone remember Web3? Does anyone remember NTF? These things are now being black-holed into, even by the tech optimists, into something else. But this stuff is something which we need to be aware of, right? We've been faced with a big giant ad, and that is serving the interest of those who put the ad online. Now, the elephant in the room, as Penelope said, and I get to the fundamental point here, is that yes, there is a huge amount of activity in what is known as the productization of the technology. So at the lower level, you have a fantastic number of people who are creating plugins, if you like, applications. I know any number of young people who are leaving jobs and going to do a startup, and good luck to them, because most of it will die, as it is normal in these cycles. But we are talking fundamentally about a vertical stack, a vertical supply stack. These products are at the bottom of the stack. Above it, and this is where the problem lies potentially, further up the chain, there are the giant models, the foundation models, which are essentially the backbone on which these API, these plugins are essentially built. And as Penelope alluded to, and people are beginning to realize, these foundation models are phenomenally expensive at this stage to build and to train, because you need forests of GPU, you need data lakes, and you need mountains of cloud, all of which is enormously expensive. And so if you talk to academics, even in Stanford, they say there's not a single university in the US who can match the power of the computing power. Possibly the power of the top 20 universities in the US doesn't match what is available to this company. So you have resources that are pooled in the hand of a few. Who are they? Well, who might they be? The usual suspects, right? And so they're building their own models internally as an insurance kind of policy. Of course, Microsoft is building its own, and Google is building its own, and Amazon is building its own, and everyone is building their own. But look at also what's happening. There are big investment in this large and successful models that are happening under our nose, okay? So Microsoft invested first in 2019, then 2021, and now in 2023, and this was an investment. Anthropic, Google is investing in it, Amazon is investing in it, and Microsoft is investing in it as well. So at incredibly inflated multiples, you're talking about multiples of 80 when you think about the valuation of OpenAI, but who cares? You're spending 20 billion because you can get it back, either in kind by selling them cloud or effectively selling the product to your own. What do these investments mean, right? Because if you have an investment that becomes effectively an exclusive relationship, which is into a technology which is closed and vertically integrated into your products, well, okay, so we call it an investment now. But the reality is, in a world in which you have scarce assets, which are being owned by a few, and then are being essentially in exclusive partnerships with the large backbone infrastructure in a vertical stack, technology is proprietary, is not in the main open. And then is going to be the critical input into all of this productization downstream. Have we seen this before? Do we think there might be incentives for some sort of foreclosure there or exploitation of power? I mean, it seems to me that that is really one of the main problems that sort of faces us. And in fact, when you ask this company, I mean, the reason I'm kind of also super concerned is that when you ask them, what's your story? Why are you doing this? There is no narrative. The answer is, well, you need scale. We have it, okay? And, oh, but China, okay? China. If you don't do it, China does it. And that is not a very, very convincing or good narrative back. One word on open sourcing, because of course some of these large companies are sitting there looking very pretty, like Meta, saying we do open source, our model is open source, go away, regulator, right? But the reality is that open source is not an answer to any of this. It's another marketing ploy. I mean, again, there is a great paper written by Sarah Maya West and Meredith for OpenAI that essentially debunks this myth of the open source. The technology has got characteristics of scale requirement. That means we're not talking about software, which benefits from a group of, willing researchers improving and tweaking an open source. We are not doing anything very useful in open source improving or pretending you can open source improve a Meta model when Meta doesn't share, for example, the training data. So the idea that something can be labeled open source, to me, is a red flag that suggests this is yet again an attempt by the incumbents to fool the regulators and the rest of the world that they are the good guys, whereas in reality the potential for entrenching that power into the future, grandfathering it, is the same. Final points. So Mike will talk about this in greater detail. I want to just, again, set the scene for regulation initiative. So yeah, of course, there is a big sense that we need to be putting guardrails in place, and as Penelope alluded to, there's been a flurry of activity just even in the last week. And yeah, you know, we hear, we don't want to intervene too early because we don't want to kill innovation. Okay, haven't we heard that before? Haven't we heard that for 20 years, and look where we are? So I'm personally very tired of that sort of invitation to just prevent type 1 error, because I think we told ourselves this tale for 20 years, and it turned out where it did. So everyone is essentially doing something. I will leave Mike to talk about the UK. The US is interesting. As Penelope again mentioned, last week, President Biden issued an executive order, a sort of fairly weighty document, which is really the first big effort in the direction of controlling and regulating ex ante the largest models. So frankly, it was a great relief to all that this wasn't much worse than it was. It's a decent document. And the reason is that the concern, which is something I want to convey, is that there is a real threat, that the largest players are encircling and engulfing the discourse and capturing the lawmakers as well. So the early signs, I must say, were not very encouraging. In July last year, there was a meeting at the White House, and they were all, guess who? The CEOs of Meta and Zuckerberg and Microsoft and Elon Musk and all there. And you say, well, is that who you're talking to? Okay. And then even the Senate Majority Leader, Schumer, in the US, had a number of insight forums on AI. And again, initially in September, he was inviting only the CEO. I mean, a meeting in which you have the CEO of the companies as informing the direction of regulation is concerning to me. However, as I say, the executive order is a serious, it seems to me, attempt. Some may argue it's a little Obama-esque, it's a little bit wishy-washy in parts, but you know, it's much better than one could have thought. Because it does make clear, I'll conclude on this, that essentially the direction of travel is that governments, the US government wants to be notified about every new development in large models that are going to be put in place, vet these models directly, so it's red teaming the models before they're released, including how they deal with protection against cyber threat. And so there is a whole order, you know, every 90, you know, in the next 90 days, in the next 180 days, every department needs to set up this infrastructure. For competition purposes, importantly, there is a leaning on the agency, the FTC in particular, to keep a watchful eye on protecting consumers, but also protecting competition, calling out concentrated control of key inputs, what I've just been talking about, calling out unlawful collusion, dominant firm, discouraging competition. So that's great. But you know, when you talk about the FTC needing to be vigilant and enforce and protect competition, you think, oh, but what are we really saying about what will trigger action? What is it going to be that will trigger action, and what action? And so, to me, top of the list, frankly, is that regulators should really be very, very careful and very watchful of these exclusive partnerships. Many have already occurred. But, you know, they happened 5 minutes before. Look into it. Do something about it. Just not let clever lawyers, because this is what happened so far, just essentially pass them under your nose with the description that they are agreements. They are exclusive partnership, they're partnership, but they are going to go below the threshold. So what? Call them in, I would say. And concluding, there is, of course, so then what are you going to do aside from this? Well, there is the DMA. The DMA in Europe has not even designated as a gatekeeper cloud, so we're a very long way from it doing anything on AI. And there is the AI Act, which is, of course, the lobbython exercise coming to the trilogue, the conclusion. And it does appear to want to deal with companies by degrees of risk. So if you're a very risky AI, if you're a high-risk AI, if you're a general AI, maybe you're a slightly better guy. We will see where we land. I think I'll leave it here, but I think this is absolutely the time not to just fall for this narrative that says we need innovation to be left alone. We've done nothing of the sort. We've done exactly that, and look where we are. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Christina, and indeed, I mean, you've been talking about let's not do the same mistakes as maybe we did with the platforms, that it took a while before intervention became very serious. But I think it's fair to say that the attention is there from competition authority, and this is why I will now turn to Mike Walker, who's the CMA's Chief Economic Advisor, a position that he's held since 2013. He's also an academic at King's College, and prior to that, he also had a long career in the private sector. And Mike will also cover the themes that I introduced at the start, but more specifically, he will tell us about the CMA report on foundation models, and also essentially set the scene for how the CMA is thinking about the potential risks of these models and the risk to competition. So the floor is yours, Mike.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to speak at this conference. These Lisbon conferences are always great. So obviously, standard caveat, I'm speaking as Mike Walker, I'm not speaking on behalf of the CMA. Christina is very keen on disclosures. My disclosure is I'm quite keen on consumer welfare. Actually, before I talk about the topic here, I'm just going to abuse my position terribly and make a comment about what we heard this morning from Olivier and Mark, because I think it's really important. You know, they both, I think, raised doubts about the usefulness of economics within Article 102. As an economist, I feel I have to respond. And based on my responses, I broadly speaking agree with them. Because what economics has done to 102 enforcement over the last 15 years is to make it unenforceable. It's because effect space does not mean complexity. And what economists have done, particularly private sector economists, I was one, I'm not immune to criticism. What economists have done is they have made the whole thing really complex. That's absolutely not what effects should be about, and absolutely not what economics should be about. Bob Solow, Nobel Prize winning economist, father of growth theory, I mean, won his Nobel Prize for his PhD thesis, basically, so pretty irritating guy. He wrote a fantastic article entitled Faith, Hope and Clarity, and he made the point that the most important contribution of economics is to provide clarity, you know, and that's a really big contribution it can make, and it can absolutely make those contributions in 1 or 2 cases, but I'm afraid we haven't for the last 15 years. So I'm completely where Olivier and Mark are in the need for something to change that. Okay, so after that abuse, okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the first and the third questions that Penelope has set us in my 10 minutes. So, and I'm going to focus a little bit, or I'm going to structure this a little bit around the paper on foundation models that the CMA published earlier this year. So as we've been told, these foundation models, these very large-scale AI models, you know, that can then be adapted for a wide range of tasks. So, you know, you have the foundation model, and then you have a bunch of plugins below them. So Christina's probably going to hit me for this, but look, the starting point is actually, you know, we ought to believe that foundation models should have significant capacity to produce great products, improve productivity. You know, they might even be a catalyst for disruptive innovation, and that's absolutely what we need in this area, disruptive innovation. So, you know, I think we should never lose sight of that. However, there absolutely are a bunch of competition concerns. I'm going to largely agree with Christina on that. That we completely should be concerned about. There's a bunch of other concerns, of course, as well, which are not competition concerns, arguably bigger concerns. We should be worried about those as well, but not today, not in this room. So, the way we structured our foundation markets, our foundation models paper was on 3 layers. You know, so the development of foundation models, which is very much what Christina's been talking about, the use of foundation models in applications, and then the consumer experience. And I'm going to spend most of my time at that top layer, because I think that is the most important, but there are issues at other layers. So look, if you're going to develop a foundation, I should say, I'm talking about the CMA's foundation model paper. The ADC published a couple of days ago a really very, very good paper on AI and foundation models. I thoroughly recommend it. I am going to shamelessly steal some data from it and some comments. So to create a foundation model, you basically need four things. You need enormous amounts of computing power, and there's basically only three. There's three hyperscalers who provide that to you. As Christine's already talked about, Google and Amazon and Microsoft. You also need the chips. NVIDIA got a very strong position in there. Just to give you an indication of sort of scale, this is a stat from the ADC paper. The supercomputer that Microsoft built for OpenAI, which obviously it has its strategic investment in, that had 285,000 CPU cores and 10,000 GPUs. Christine's already put that into the context of the size of academic computing power. This is enormous. Okay, so you need access to computing power, you need access for data for pre-training the models, and then for fine-tuning them, you need capital resources, huge capital resources. So, more than 100 million for these largest models. And of course, you do need some technical expertise, which is not talked about very often, but data scientists are a scarce resource. And they do get, rightly, they therefore get paid large amounts of money. So, let's think about the access to computing power. So, there's a bunch of evidence, I think, that there are concerns at that level of the CSP with the hyperscalers. In the UK, for instance, Ofcom, telecoms regulator, has just done a market study into that and has now referred it to CMA for us to do further work. So they certainly think there are concerns in that. To the extent that models will continue to be better, the larger they are, and so far that has been a pretty solid correlation. Larger the models are in terms of the computing power behind them and the data sets behind them, the better they are. To the extent that that continues, that creates a problem with this bottleneck. I find it hard to believe that there isn't going to be a market power problem there. History tells us generally that firms with ownership of scarce and very valuable resources can exploit that market power. It also specifically tells us that these firms have got history. So I think it's entirely reasonable that we should be worried, as Christina is worried, about that position for those three firms in cloud service market, allowing them to get a position in foundation model market, AI market, and that would be a concern. Okay, I'll come back to what we might do in one moment. Well, actually, no, one more thing here. Note, the strategic partnerships that Christina talked about, I'm not a fan of those. But the fundamental problem is not strategic partnerships. The fundamental problem is the market power of the CSPs and the requirements for the technical and financial resources to build these models. Okay? And that the strategic partnerships are a result of those fundamental aspects of the market. Okay, so that's access to computing power. Second thing, you need access to data. To the extent that access to proprietary data becomes essential to create these models in future, then again, I think there's potential competition concerns there, because again, we know who the firms are who have access to very large amounts of data. Meta make the point that Llama 2 entirely built on open source data. Absolutely fantastic. But in future, do we believe that the models will get better the more data they're trained on? And the likelihood that a lot of that data is going to be proprietary? I think we do. So I think there's a concern there. So, I think there's two really big concerns here, which are incredibly difficult to work out what the answer is. It's all very well to say, oh, look, we need to regulate them, and we mustn't make mistakes we made last time round. I completely agree with that narrative. However, that doesn't actually tell us what the right answer is. Basically, what's happening here is that we've got big scale and big network effects. Those are really difficult to deal with. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you what the answer is today because I'm afraid I don't know. I was amused by, I mean, Christina's point about, the Biden administration talking to, to the CEOs of these companies, and that's probably not a great starting point. I was also very amused to hear Rishi Sunak talk about AI potentially being a co-pilot to help people. I've never heard him use that word before. It's, I'm sure, entirely just unrelated to the fact that Microsoft's product is, of course, called Copilot, and, of course, Microsoft has been talking to Rishi Sunak. Okay, so I'm going to leave that at the level of foundation models, because I've only got about another 2 minutes. At the level of the actual building the models. I'm just briefly going to talk about consumer protection issues there. We know there are consumer protection issues here. I mean, there's obviously hallucinations, significant problem, not a trivial problem to solve, I'm told. I don't understand technical stuff, but, it's not clear that we're going to get beyond hallucinations. So we have to think about how we deal with the consumer protection issues there. But it's quite clear that consumers don't have a great concept of what it is they are interacting with. I mean, I think you both made that point already. And to the extent that competition authorities, consumer protection authorities can help to clarify that and potentially impose rules on firms to ensure the right sort of disclosure to ensure that consumers are able to make informed choices, I think that will be important. Okay. In our paper, last thing I say about our paper, then I'm going to go into question 3 briefly. In our paper, we produced 6 or 7 principles that we'd like to see the market, a well-functioning market, exhibit. So, we'd like to see people who want to develop foundation models having access to the key inputs. We would like to see a diversity of models. So we're not as down on open source models as Christina is. Listen to Christina, I'm not sure she's wrong. We would like downstream consumers to have a good concept of what it is that they're actually getting and for their not going to competitive behaviour by upstream firms to leave themselves into downstream firms. These are all very sensible principles we'd like to see, but actually they're not action. And so Christina's challenge is the really good one. Okay, is now the time we actually have to take some action, and if so, what are we doing about those upstream concerns? Right, 1 more minute. So I'm going to talk about how AI might be useful for competition authorities. I'm just going to use 2 examples. I know Fred and Francesca are going to talk about others. From recent academic papers, both of which I thought was interesting. So one is work recently by Urshov et al. It's a working paper, using AI to try and understand when influencers are being paid to say what they're saying, but are not disclosing that. So influencers, if they are being paid to advertise a product, they are meant to disclose that. Of course, in a world in which that is the law, the influencer who is willing to advertise and accept payment, but without disclosing it, becomes more valuable. Consumers will put more weight on them because they'll think, oh, they weren't paid to do that. So Urshov and et al. Have used AI to try and get a handle on how many undisclosed adverts, or what percentage of adverts on Twitter they've used are undisclosed. They reckon it's 95% using their data, which is an enormously high proportion, and they reckon it actually hasn't come down since regulation has come in. It's only a working paper. It's an interesting use. The other thing is using AI to detect dark patterns. So some work by Stuart Mills and Richard Whittle in the UK, looking at how you might use AI to find dark patterns and see how consumers react to them. And basically what they do is they use AI to simulate different types of consumers, get those AI-generated consumers to interact with various websites where there might be dark patterns, see what the outcome is, and then do an audit as to whether actually those are the sorts of outcomes that we should want to see. Okay, it's very early work, but again, that seems to me to be potentially very interesting, and that's more than my 10 minutes, so I'll shut up.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for reminding that indeed our job as economists is to put some structure and actually help authorities think about some complicated problems and what are the economics that underlie those problems, and to be able then to start about possible solutions and action. So I will now turn to Frédéric Génie, who definitely doesn't need an introduction. He's been a leading scholar for many, many years. He's been the very active and is currently the chairman of the OECD competition committee, and he's held numerous roles over the years at the competition, French competition agency, at the French Cour de Cassation, at the UK Office of Fair Trading. An amazing career, an amazing mind, and we're very happy to hear your thoughts about this very interesting topic. And I think you will also maybe touch upon a bit the cloud, which is one of the important assets, as you have also done some work on this market recently. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And first, I want to congratulate the Portuguese Competition Authority for its anniversary, but also for holding this really interesting conference. So many thanks for having invited me. In terms of disclosure, I mean, you just referred to a study I did for CISPE, which is a trade organization of independent providers of cloud infrastructure. And the study was basically interviewing customers, firms, that try to externalize their data and to put them on the cloud. And the short answer that I got from listening to those customers is something which is very close to what was mentioned just before, the stacking of things. So in the cloud, quite aside from the generative AI, you have productivity software, you have middleware, and then after that you have cloud infrastructure. And companies, once they decide on a productivity software, basically have to organize themselves, their information flows, so that it will work with the productivity software, okay? But they become very dependent on the productivity software. So, and the productivity software is only going to work with the data in certain conditions. So when the firms tries to externalize its data, taking from on the premises to off the premises, the question is, where is it going to store its data? It's got to store it in a place which can work with the productivity or the middleware software. And they are faced with major actors who are vertically integrated and also provide stocking capacities and infrastructure. And their stories, without going into any qualification, is that they're under an enormous amount of pressure in different ways to use the infrastructure of the provider of their productivity software or middleware, and they face difficulties and possibly penalties if they try to store their data elsewhere, which means that there is no real competition at the level of the infrastructure. And I think that one can translate this probably to generative AI. But what I really want to talk about today is collusion. Now, collusion, this is great for competition authorities because they feel very comfortable. This is the bread and butter issue. But when it comes to digital collusion, the first reaction of competition authorities was to say, oh, we've got all the tools. Ms. Lawson gave a speech when she said, you know, if it's forbidden for Joe, then it's got to be forbidden, irrespective of whether it's an algorithm or not. There's been a not dissenting view, but a more refined view that says we have to make a distinction between different types of situations. The first and the easy one is the case which is the algorithm as a facilitating device for collusion. The second, which is a bit more difficult, is the hub and spoke kind of model. And the third one is the autonomous tacit collusion, where you have different players who are competing with each other. Each one has a different type of algorithm, pricing algorithm, and those pricing algorithms, without any instruction, eventually realize that collusion is better for the profits of the firms. So in terms of enforcement, we started with a simple thing, and the cases there was the US Tompkins case, and then in Spain, the PropTech case. And there were a few others. There was one in the UK, for example. But in those cases, you had an algorithm, and in the algorithm, there was an instruction, in fact, which reflected an agreement not to compete. So in the PropTech case, for example, the algorithm was used to share the commissions. I mean, it was a multiple listing database for real estate transactions with an exclusive membership. So you would list the property for sale, and if there was a transaction, it was the fee had to be divided in two between the seller and the buyer. And there was a mechanism which was a mechanism to make sure that the actors actually behaved this way. So this was basically a traditional cartel. It was just using an algorithm to speed up things, but there was nothing exceptional there. Now, the hub and spoke has developed over the last 2 or 3 years, mostly in the US, in an interesting way, because it does raise a very good question. And I will say that the autonomous tacit collusion at this point is a theoretical possibility. I mean, there have been literature on this, but I don't know of any case that has been looked at anywhere in the world, so I'm not ready to talk about this. So the hub and spoke case. Now, the idea there is that a set of competitors all subscribe to the same service, which is a pricing algorithm, okay? The company that runs this pricing algorithm gets data both from the firms who subscribe, but also general data on the market, and sends price recommendation to the members. And we've had cases like this in Europe, for example, the Ageras case in Denmark. We've had an interesting case, which is the Uber pricing algorithm, because in a sense, it's proposing a price to all the competitors, if you call them competitors, with interesting divergences between countries. Brazil, for example, decided that Uber pricing was so efficient in matching demand and supply that it dismissed the case. In the US, the Uber pricing has also been brought to the courts, but the courts have said, well, they want to have a look at it from the point of view of possible collusion, so different sensitivity there. But what really started the topic was an article in ProPublica, which was published in 2022, and the title of it is "Rents Going Up, One Company's Algorithm Could Be Why." And basically what it said was that there was a company called RealPage, which had an algorithm for the managers of buildings, where they would give some of the data. The algorithm would also look at the pricing by local competitors, as well as general data on supply and demand, and would send back to the company everyday suggestions for the new pricing suggestions for the new listings. The ProPublica article said the result of this has been a tremendous increase in rents in many places in the US, together with the fact that it's become clear that some renters were refusing to rent some apartments or some locals, presumably to increase the price and to create a scarcity, and this led to those increases in prices. And the firm RealPage, which, by the way, is the result of a merger between two firms, because there were two algorithms, and in 2017, this merger was allowed by the Department of Justice of the United States, as a result of which RealPage is the dominant kind, at least a very important pricing algorithm for rental pieces in the US. Advertised that if you use their pricing algorithm, your revenue are going to go up by up to 15 or 20%. And the reality seems to be indeed that this is what happens. So those were the facts which were mentioned in the ProPublica article, which created a huge sensation. One of the direct consequences of this article, which was published in 2022, as I said, is 20 civil class actions which have been started. The first one was started in San Diego, California, and then there were 19 others or 20 others which were started all over the US by renters who were claiming that the increase in rent that they had was due to the fact that the property owner that they were renting from was using RealPage, and that this was all a big collusion to try to increase prices. It also led to at least 2 enforcement actions, and the latest one is from last week, from November 1st, by the Attorney General of D.C. In Washington, who started proceedings against a large number of renters in Washington, claiming that they were using RealPage to increase prices. So that's the large. So it's interesting how one article, on the basis of the fact that I have mentioned, was able, in a sense, to start a wave of class actions. There's been another case, which is worth talking about, in Las Vegas, Gibson versus MGM. And in that case, it's not the rental of apartment, it's the room rentals in hotel on the Vegas Strip. Okay. And there is a company that offers pricing algorithm for those hotels. And the allegation against is the same thing, that this has led to an inflation in the price of those rooms, and that this is a collusion because they all use the same algorithm. They provide data to the algorithm, and this data is being used to make the price predictions. What is interesting is that in the Vegas case, there's been a development about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where the judge threw out the complaint and said, what you're telling me is that there are a number. First of all, you don't even identify who the hotel owners are. You say the hotel, the Vegas Strip hotels are using this, but you don't pinpoint which one is using, and you don't establish that they all use the same algorithm, first. Second, you don't tell me that they've committed themselves to follow the recommendation. Third, you can't even tell me when they started using this. So whatever increase in price may have nothing to do with this. You don't establish the fact that they use the same algorithm. And by the way, for Sherman Act Section 1 action, I need a meeting of the mind. Where is the meeting of the mind? And you haven't provided any evidence that there was a meeting of the mind on anything, either on the algorithm or on following the instructions or... And what's interesting is that Rainmaker, which is the company which is running this algorithm, is strongly defending its model by saying that it has nothing to do with collusion. What it does, it says, I use internal data from each hotel to help, and a few public data on markets, to try to give them a better way to price their hotels. The district attorneys say, yes, but you organize meetings of all your clients to know how the algorithm can be improved, and I consider that those meetings may be places where there is some collusion going on. So there is a whole debate about where to find the collusion, where to find the meeting of the mind that would be useful to start Section 1 of the... Okay, but basically the judge took a very classical position to say no. Now, I just want to put those things together to say that all this leads to a number of issues that we should think about, that competition authorities should think about, which are a bit more complicated than the idea that if it's forbidden for Joe, then it's forbidden for an algorithm. The first set of issues is at the conceptual level. Should we revise our concept of how we should treat oligopolistic coordination? Do we really need to have a meeting of the mind, or is there or should there be a violation, which would be collective anti-competitive practices, even if there's no meeting of the mind? And indeed, when there's algorithm at work, there may be cases where there is no such thing as a meeting of the mind. But the second thing is that the traditional jurisprudence on collusive behavior makes a big difference, for example, between past information and kind of live information, very recent information, and finds that exchange of information which is more recent is more aggravating. Now, in those algorithms, of course, the idea is that the current behavior should be or is a function, in fact, of past behavior. So the distinction between what is live and current and what is past in terms of determination of pricing is completely blurred compared to the division that we have traditionally in competition law. So we may also want to think about whether or idea that if the information which is exchanged is from yesterday or the day before yesterday, it's not as incriminating as it is if it is something of today. Second, there are practical issues. For example, let's take the Las Vegas case, and let's assume that it is the facts are the ones which I've mentioned. What happened? I mean, should we hold the first hotel who decided to subscribe to this service? Should we consider that he's part of a conspiracy or part of a collusive? Because when he subscribed, he did not expect, I mean, he expected that real page would give him information on how to best price its rooms. But he certainly didn't expect that others would do it because he was the first one. So the question is whether we should make distinctions about when people got into the act, whether they all got into the act simultaneously, in which it might be a bit incriminating because it might suspect that the reason for being part of this is because the others are part of it, or when it's a stacked entry into a model, whether some of the firms were completely innocent, I mean, were using the pricing algorithm to improve their performances, but with no intention whatsoever, or no even concept of the fact that it could be anti-competitive. Then there are technical issues. One of the issues in both cases is whether the algorithms separate the non-public data from the public data, and whether it allows, in fact, the landlords or the hotel owners to get access to non-public data from others, or whether, because they're separated, they're not being accessed. So it means that to really try to use the competition law, you have to get into the mechanics of the algorithm. There are procedural issues. Some people have said, well, the risk that goes with algorithm is the fact that it may be quite effective in promoting collusion. We completely agree with the fact that it can promote efficiency, but it can also promote collusion. And if it does, this is a huge risk for society. So we should have a simplified standard of proof for this, or maybe a reversal of the standard of proof because of the risk which is involved. I personally think that this is a very dangerous path, but the question is whether we should have different levels of standards of proof, and whether when it comes to algorithmic collusion, we should have a lower standard of proof than we have. I'm saying this because there is one hypothesis in both cases, which is the following. Imagine that hotels, just like businesses in general, don't really know where their marginal cost is, okay? So they base their decisions on average cost because that's easier to compute, and it's only a thing of economists to base decisions on marginal cost. Let's assume they're in the part of their cost curve which is ascending, so that the marginal cost is above the average cost. Okay? And let's assume that those algorithms are absolutely pure. They look at the firm, and in fact, they compute the marginal cost curve and tell the firms that they should increase their price to set their price equal to marginal cost, and possibly that they use the data to try to tell them what their residual demand is, because we're in a kind of monopolistic competition environment. Okay. Now, if that were the case, what would we expect? Well, we would expect that a hotel or renter who used to base his decisions on his average cost, all of a sudden realize that its marginal cost is above its average cost, and therefore would increase its price and probably would reduce the quantity that he puts on the market, which is exactly what ProPublica was complaining about, the fact that rents go up and that some of the rooms or some of the apartments get unoccupied. So I think that the basis on which those particular claims are based is very fragile, because it could be consistent either with an algorithm which teaches people how to best maximize their profits, and that any increase in price doesn't mean that we are in an anti-competitive. It may mean that the pricing was wrong because there was a lack of information on the part of the firms. Now, it could also mean that there is some kind of collusion. If that's the case, what kind of collusion are we looking for, and do we have to change our standards to try to loosen them to facilitate to eliminate the risk that algorithms be used for this? All those questions are raised. The next step is going to be a set of competitors using different algorithms with no instruction whatsoever to collude, but the algorithm eventually, after a while, from what we know from the theory, end up finding the collusive equilibrium, and the question is, what should we do about this? We don't have cases yet, at least that I'm aware of. I'll stop here.
Thank you, and indeed very interesting new types of collusive agreements, and what do we do now as competition authorities when companies use the same pricing algorithm, and where to put the boundary between effective pricing and what is collusion. But there again, I hope that economists will help us differentiate the good from the bad. But for sure, a number of legal questions will also will have to be dealt with when we deal with algorithms as the main tool for collusive outcome, or even possibly in the future as originators of collusive outcome. So I will now pass the floor to our last panelist, Francesco De Carolis, who's the academic, one of the academics on the panel. He's professor of economics at Bocconi in Milan, and also the chairman of the digital advertising group at the Observatory of the Online Platform Economy of the European Commission. It's a very long title. And you've had a number of advisory roles over the years for the Italian presidency of the Council of Ministers, the Italian Competition Authority, and the Milan Court of Justice. Your research focuses on market design, public procurement, and regulation of digital platforms. So the themes that we are discussing this morning, and the floor is yours, Francisco.
Thank you so much, Penelope. Thanks so much to the Portuguese Competition Authority for this invitation and for putting together this great program. And thanks to all of you for being here today. So, disclosures, for private sector, I just worked for Stellantis Group in the last few years. Other than that, it's just public institutions. Now, as an academic, I would like to say that none of us on this panel this morning has defined exactly what we mean by artificial intelligence, and probably nobody did because it's very hard. Within academia, for instance, there is no consensus. And if you, as practitioners, as competition authorities, you try to read the academic literature, the first barrier is that there are different definitions out there. There is a narrow definition that says artificial intelligence just pertains to the use of autonomous learning algorithm, what is called also reinforcement learning. So think of, for instance, an algorithm that can learn to play chess or learn to play Go by itself. You just need to tell what are the moves and what is the objective, winning the game, and it will learn by itself. This is one type, and this is reinforcement learning. But then there are broader definitions of artificial intelligence. For instance, everything that is related to machine learning. An algorithm that would partition the customers of a company between customers with a high willingness to pay and with a low willingness to pay, that does this division, is typically called a machine learning algorithm. It can be supervised, unsupervised, and in this broader definition, you would put it as artificial intelligence. These things are very different, and they have different implications. The European Union, for instance, in the AI Act, takes the broader definition. In this panel, we're using a broader definition. but it's important because when you relate to the academic literature, this is clearly a strong barrier. Now, in this broader definition, academics are still trying to measure what is the impact of AI, what is the adoption of AI. Just in the last month, the Stanford Digital Lab has released two very interesting studies. One is on the early adoption of AI among US firms. So this is not development of AI, this is usage of AI technologies. So they defined a series of technologies as AI, and they tried to see in a representative panel of US firms what was the adoption, and it was quite low. It was around 6%. This was studying early adoptions in 2017, 2018, but it was much lower than what other studies for the same period were saying. It's much lower than what we usually have in our debates, and the reason they claim is that the typical data come from surveys that are not representative, they're focused on large firms, and adoption is very skewed. There is an AI divide. It's large firms. In that study, it's firms with 5,000 or more employees that are adopting AI. And so AI is skewed towards certain firms. And among large firms is also newer firms, firms with younger owners, younger managers that are adopting. So there is a differential. Another interesting finding is that AI is extremely impactful. For instance, they've studied a Fortune 500 company that sells software and there's a customer center where they run a big experiments. They gave to half of their employees in the customer center an AI assistant. Think of giving ChatGPT as an helper to some of these workers, and the others worked in the traditional way. Well, the ones using the ChatGPT assistant were able to solve 14 problems per hour more. Imagine that these people are there in the customer center solving problems. The increase in productivity was just gigantic. So this very much tells us that there will be very rapid adoption. And we see this in this debate and in this excitement about this kind of tools. However, academic research is also telling us that AI has not yet arrived to some sectors where we would have been fairly confident to see it. For instance, Ali Ortazio at Chicago and co-authors have been given access to incredible data from one of the legacy carriers in the US. So one of the airlines, big airlines that were there before the liberalization, with unprecedented access to data and algorithm. And they found that the algorithm is pretty poor by today's standard. And the reason is because they've been using the same algorithm since the last 30 years. And the data that they have is amazing, but the algorithm is not very much powerful. So you can read this result in two different ways. One is that companies have organizational elements inside them, frictions, that will slow down adoption. And this is their explanation, because they study that the group that does the pricing algorithm is not free to just implement the best for the company. Each group within a large organization has its own objectives, and there will be frictions. Another way to read this result is that there are huge benefits that companies could achieve. In their specific application, they quantify that if this airline were to move to more performing algorithms, it could increase its revenues by 14%, which is a big margin. And so if companies that have data, like airlines, start to realize how much they could gain by transitioning to a more powerful algorithm, you should expect big changes in the way they price. In this specific case, this would lead, for instance, to higher prices for business customers of the airline and lower prices for non-business customers. So interesting also heterogeneous impacts. Another area where economists are quite sure that there will be huge impacts by AI is that of insurance markets. And every market where imperfect information is important, because to a large extent, AI means prediction machines, being able to predict better. And clearly, an area like insurance that is all about trying to predict what will be the cost of this person buying my car insurance, buying my health insurance, is such that is bound to have transformative impacts from better prediction. And here is very tricky, and I think it will be a point of interest for competition authorities. The fact that, for instance, new players are coming into this market with better algorithm, better prediction, and they're trying to steal from incumbents the most lucrative customers, for instance, in the car insurance, the one that have few accidents. In a sense, this is making the market way more competitive with these new entrants and with low costs through which they are attracting customers. But this poses also an issue potentially of stability. And so competition authorities might need to interact with prudential authorities to understand to what extent competition here is purely beneficial or there are some risks to the stability of the system if risks get all clustered in certain firms. Now, moving to some of my research, the reason why I've been invited and to sit in this prestigious panel, and answering to Penelope's questions through some of my research. So in the last 15 years, I've been working a lot on digital advertising, which is clearly one of the most important areas in the digital economy, because digital advertisements provide the money that fuels most of the tech companies. In digital advertising, artificial intelligence has been exploited and used extensively in the last years. Think of the search auctions through which Google sells to advertisers the possibility of appearing on the search engine, so displaying their ads when you search for something on the Google webpage. Well, this world has been changing a lot in recent years, and artificial intelligence algorithms have been changing in an interesting way. So let me explain you some details, and this will speak to this risk of entrenchment that Penelope was mentioning. So in these auctions, it's very important what kind of information is released to the bidders, that is, to the advertisers or their intermediaries. And you can think of two polar situations. There can be a situation in which the platform gives back to each advertiser the information about all the bids that were given by the rivals. Or you can think of a situation where the platform doesn't tell much information about the bidder. The bidder only knows what it bid and whether it won some auction or not. One finding that we obtained through studying a little bit how these auctions by Google work under these different data structures is that the data determines the algorithm that can be used by the advertisers. Okay? So this is telling you, in this context of artificial intelligence, the data really pins down the type of algorithm that can be used. And algorithms are not all the same. For instance, if all the bids are disclosed to the bidders, they could use, sorry, I will use some jargon now, something that is called stateful synchronous algorithm, that is super powerful algorithm that allow very good optimization for the advertisers. If less data are released, at most something called stateless asynchronous algorithm can be used. This is much less powerful, okay? So the data determines the algorithm. What does it mean now for the platform? Well, it means that the platform, by deciding the frequency at which the data released, the level of aggregation at which the data released, determines the type of algorithm that the other businesses interacting with the platform can use. Now, if you look at this with this logic, then some moves by Google in the last few years might be interpreted potentially in some different way relative to how they were described. Google in the last few years has restricted substantially access to the data to the advertisers and their intermediaries bidding in their auction. The motive was privacy concerns. Better protecting the privacy on the Google platform required aggregation of the data and not disclosing any more detailed information. But this clearly has impacted very much the algorithm of those interacting and buying advertisements on the Google platform, and has led to the transformation of algorithm, the exit of many intermediaries. So this is potentially something to pay a lot of attention. What kind of data are they releasing, at what level, and what this implies for the businesses interacting with that? Also, another element of attention here is the fact that these platforms are offering their own proprietary AI systems. For instance, remaining within Google, there is something called Google Performance Max, which is the AI system of Google. You are an advertiser. You have the option of delegating all your marketing expenses to Google itself, to the artificial intelligence. Say, this is my objective, this is the money, and Google optimizes for you how to bid on Google's own auctions. And this Google Performance Max is extremely effective. Advertisers love it, and it's better than the AI system offered by the third parties. But the question clearly is the access that this Google AI system have to the data identical to the one of the third parties, or is it differential? And do we want it to be differential, if it is differential? Because this could be a form of abuse, potentially. So this is one element. So data determines the algorithm. And in terms of policy, this also means that in the AI Act, maybe a more close connection between data policies in the DMA and what is in the AI Act would be very useful. A second point, and related to what you were mentioning, Frederic, and the capabilities of these algorithms to collude. An interesting and complex feature that came out of the studies is that algorithms are indeed very good at learning to play strategies that result in prices that are supra-competitive. I'm trying not to use the word collusive, because it will be up to you to determine whether these are collusive prices or not. But the original results that people in academia tend to ascribe to a group of 4 Italian researchers, Calvano, Calzolari, De Nicolò, and Pastorello, a paper published in the American Economic Review that showed that these autonomous learning algorithms have a propensity to end up in collusive pricing in simple simulation of oligopoly game. Well, those results have been essentially confirmed under a variety of settings. So they're quite strong. It's quite persistent. And in a sense, it's very much related to what you said. These are algorithms that obey to orders very well. If you tell it, maximize my price, and you know that collusive price is higher than competition price. So it will have a tendency to achieve whatever you tell it. The problem is, and what we have discovered recently, is that the motives for which they go to these supra-competitive prices are very different from what we originally thought. And things are very complicated. So for instance, in this Calvano paper, they relate those strategies to human strategies, to what we think happens in real collusion markets. And so punishment-reward scheme. And they suggested also tests for understanding whether algorithms had these features or not. The most recent literature, Xavier Lambien and papers that followed, showed that that's not the reasons. These are, or it's not the only reason. There are more reasons. These algorithms have a series of parameters governing their behavior, the discount factor, the learning rate, and the experimentation rate. And it's a combination of these parameters that can lead them there. This means, from the enforcement perspective, that it's very hard also to understand how to deal, how to find this collusion, how to curb this kind of phenomena, because it's very much embedded into the working of this algorithm. One way to remember this point is that pricing by the algorithm is completely different relative to pricing by a human being. Prices of an hotel, a human being would never put a room here at the Hyatt at $1,000 per night. The algorithm, if you instruct, unless you instruct it explicitly never to do that, it will do it. Because it needs to try, because it needs to learn. It's only through trial and error that it learns. And this is very different. So you will end up with strategies and with patterns that are completely different. And we are still not at the stage in which we can fully understand how they behave, but certainly this is an area of concern. And for instance, teams like yours, Penelope, that need to deal with these complicated issues, need to work very hard and to find ways to integrate economic thinking into data science, because these are complex problems.
Thank you, Francesco. And indeed, what I take from this is that we still have a lot of work on a lot of issues, but not only technically and economically, but also legally. So we have run a bit out of time. So what I wanted to do was to leave the opportunity to the panelists to quickly react, 1 or 2 minutes max per panelist to react to what the other panelists have said. You're not obliged, but you can if you want to. And if we can maybe have 1 or 2 questions max also at the end, we can also try to do that before the lunch. So does one of you want to kick it off? Christina?
Well, surprisingly, I will jump in. I found what Francesca said very interesting, and I think, of course, we need that kind of academic work, and we need it to be policy-oriented in a big way. So I think a number of insights that he mentioned are really worthwhile, and I commend him for bringing them to the attention of this. I want to go back to some of the discussion we had at the beginning, because this was a varied panel with lots of different segments. And I want to go back to my obsession with a strategic partnership. I disagree, Mike, sorry, with your view that this is not something which is a problem in itself. It is a manifestation of the market power. Well, let's think about what is happening here. What is happening is that instead of having full-blown acquisition, you have a variant of it, which is an exclusive partnership, the implication of which is that the firm that is in the exclusive partnership can no longer be an independent competitor, right? We're talking about effectively what Andreas Mundt describes as a mergers in all but name. And you don't have to look very far. Yesterday there was the OpenAI show in Silicon Valley, and who was on screen with Sam Altman? Well, guess what? Satya Nadella, and the two of them were having a chat. So if that isn't an indication of the deep integration between these two entities that have to be thought of as one, I don't know what it is. And so if you, competition authority, allow this kind of partnership to be signed under your nose for phenomenal prices in ways that the lawyers can write up and say to you, sorry, good morning, good evening, you can look into it. It is a problem. It is an issue. Because it does create this consolidation of the power in the hands of the usual suspect, which we know is impossible to undo ex post. So that is something that I really think is clear and real. And we can all kind of sit here and look into the future and say, I don't know, what can we do, DMA, Act, maybe in 5 years. These are things that are happening now. So we'll watch and we'll wait, and then we'll say, sorry, oh my God, this snuck up on me. How did it happen? I don't know, I'm not sure. The real second point and final point that I want to make is that the reason we need to learn from the past is that actually we are no longer in 2010. We have all of this experience. My real worry is that the overlords of our time who are sitting with prime ministers and are essentially saying, my market cap, dear prime minister, is bigger than your GDP. Try and play nice. Okay? This is what happens today, because we're looking at companies which are market caps of trillions are bigger than the GDP of some of the countries. And so what really worries me is the glad handing, the encircling of countries by these players who, and then you find in a situation in which politicians, because of fascination with tech, because of fear of missing out, because they want the toys, are going to be in the bizarre situation of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom softballing, interviewing Elon Musk, who looks like Nero the Emperor, and says, who are you, essentially. So this is a problem.
Okay. So can I just come back?
I think Mike is desperate to answer.
I don't want to suggest the strategic partnerships are not a problem, but I do want to suggest that getting rid of those strategic partnerships doesn't solve the problem. Because, you know, the hyperscalers, they've got the computing power, they've got the data, they've got the financial resources, they can hire the tech resources. So that is the fundamental problem. Yeah, I'm not wild about strategic partnerships either, but the key point is, if we just ban those strategic partnerships, I don't think we solve anything. We have to be cleverer than that.
I got two sets of different issues. One of them is related to what Francesco was saying. In the list of questions that one has when we deal about collusion, I forgot one, which is what kind of remedies could we impose? Let's assume that we find that do we have to forego all the efficiency benefits from all this, and how do we separate the two? But the other one is the question of endogeneity, the fact that suggestions which are made would never have been taken up spontaneously by the actors. And in one of the cases in the US, there is an explicit statement that says, well, which is the rental of houses, where the users say, the suggestions I get, I would never have dared do that, but because it is a suggestion by the algorithm, then I'm going to use it. And whether this kind of effect, psychological effect, should be put into the analysis to say there's a particular danger with those pricing algorithms. The second thing that I wanted to say very briefly is on the third topic, because nobody has really talked about it, to say that the use of artificial intelligence by competition authorities in their enforcement activity, from what we've had as experience at OECD, there are 3 levels, I would say. A lot of competition authorities have tried to use screening mechanism, and of course, they hope that with machine learning, those screening can become even more efficient. So, to find cases. Another set of competition authorities have used this to prioritize cases. When they have several possible cases, they use an artificial intelligence. Brazil is one of those countries, for example, to which one is the most promising. And finally, at least one competition authority, and I think that this is the way of the future, Singapore is using artificial intelligence to analyze the data or analyze the documents that it sees. And I think that with the language foundational models, this is probably the most important use that competition authorities should focus on, because when they get to firms, they get a huge amount of data, and it takes an enormous amount of time to try to sort through. And there are a lot of relationships that can be found by models of the type, which would not be obvious to people. So on whether it's terribly useful to have digital screens to find cases, very mixed evidence. If you think about the cost-benefit ratio, now everybody has at least one cartel that they found because of such screening. But they spent a lot of time setting up the screen, focusing on the data that they needed. So there's one exception, which is Korea, which had a terrible screening device, didn't work at all for many years, and then they changed the weight of the different elements that they took into consideration. And this led between 2018 and today to 18 cases. And by the way, competition authorities mostly use those screens for cartel detection. You have people like Michal Gal, for example, which suggests that it should also be used in the case of abuse, but also for mergers. But I don't know that there's been much advancement there.
There's also work on market monitoring and also to use more text-based evidence from the web. Maybe just one last word?
Yes, maybe 30 seconds just to complement what you just said. One last usage of AI for competition authorities that was not mentioned, but I think we should reason about, is ex-post evaluation of intervention. Think, for instance, in the tech sector, the various interventions that took place at European level, but also at national levels. Then we can learn from these experiences, and we can learn for future cases in antitrust, but also for regulation within the DMA. And so these techniques have improved the quality and the speed at which we can do ex-post assessment, and so we should not neglect this kind of usage.
Thank you. I don't know what time it is exactly, but is there one burning question from the audience? Or are you all desperate? There is one.
What time is lunch?
So we'll take one question and then we will break for the lunch.
Hi, I'm sorry for bothering you with this question. I'm kind of a rookie in the Portuguese authority. My name is Martin. This question is for the entire panel, if I'm lucky enough. I would like to ask you if you guys think that the national authorities have enough tools to detect tacit collusion between competitors using different algorithms that eventually ended up communicating with each other in a collusive way. And how important can it be in those cases to prove the will to fix prices in collusion with competitors? And again, what is the role that consumers can play in order to try to balance the relationship with IA on the hands of companies and collusive pricing? Thank you.
I think it's a very, very wide question that I think we've tried to follow many angles of it. Maybe Mike, if you want to give it a quick shot.
I'll go very quickly. So, I mean, one of those is a legal question, so I won't answer that. The other thing is, look, I mean, all the stuff about algorithmic collusion, I mean, my view is we're going to get it because the models react faster than consumers. So why would you ever cut your prices? Because the competitors will react quicker than your consumers react. So we're going to get prices moving up. So we will get algorithmic collusion. We do have to work out what to do about it.
It was a fast answer. Okay, so please join me in thanking the panelists for what was a very broad and interesting discussion.